eventually you get absorbed in and you are Sonic.
Well, hey, everybody, and welcome back to No Repeat. It's a podcast where every week we pick 3 songs, 3 jams, 3 tracks, 3 little ditties for the perfect lounge night in your area, or just whatever kind of vibe you're trying to create. Joining me on the stage this evening, we have the great raconteur of Cincinnati, Tyler Reed.
Can we get some snaps going in here?
And the traveling man, Sean Evans.
My beat poetry idol is actually William Shatner. I just desire to have that kind of command over my own voice.
And I'll be your MC this evening, Taylor Olmstead, for an evening of beat poetry. Tyler, why are we talking about beat poetry tonight?
I don't know. This week you were challenged by the perfect beat poetry song submitted by Taylor.
That's me.
Wow. Wee! Woohoo! But if you want to be a special boy and submit your own challenge, you can DM us at us, New Repeat Pod on Instagram and Twitter, or email. Wow. Who would have thought? Write a big old digital letter to us, newrepeatpod@gmail.com. Thanks so much.
I've been sitting on this one for a while, and I thought this might be a good time to use it. We want to talk about beat poetry. We did a little crash course for the guys when we picked the challenge, but for those who aren't aware, beat poetry in its original form was kind of a fusion of, written poetry and spoken word, and often free jazz or bop jazz. It was popular in the 1950s with the Beats, thus the name, the Beat Generation, your Jack Kerouacs, your Serge Gainsbourgs, your Allen Ginsbergs, those folks, the people you think of if you think about like mid to late 50s early counterculture stuff. And this tradition kind of continues on. You have spoken word over music in pretty much every era, right? Until you get hip hop, and then like hip hop takes those ideas, combines it with the Jamaican style toasting and a few other influences, and creates rap music. But there's still kind of this like preponderance of spoken word, whether it's in punk, like your Patti Smiths, or in indie and kind of alt rock with all sorts of artists, Elliott Smith to the Hold Steady, are all kind of like playing with tropes of spoken word and non-traditional song structure and things. So what I kind of wanted to do this week was maybe look at some modern examples of songs that either could be read aloud as a beat poetry piece or that have a clear influence from beat poetry. This kind of less melodic delivery, maybe not even like based around a chorus, just kind of like free verse over music that's expressive in some kind of way. Just kind of a different format for us. What are your guys' feelings about this kind of broad umbrella of music? Is this something that you're interested in? Is it bothersome to you that it doesn't follow a song structure? Like, what are your thoughts? Clearly, I am a fan.
I feel like on the surface level of the first things that I feel like I think about when I was like approaching this challenge, I don't necessarily feel like we're like that, like deep of a cut. I feel like they were pretty like shallow in terms of like where you can find all this stuff, right? And I feel like I like the sort of the spoken word sort of format of like a song. I think it's nice to sort of have like a very different sort of like lyrical approach, different kind of lyrical delivery. I would be curious to see like how far, like how deep it goes, what sort of like, and not to like spoil it, but I think we chose like 3 white dudes mostly as like the lyricists for this challenge, and I would be curious to know like what other kind of perspectives exist out there and what like what I could kind of find through like digging through that. But yeah, I'm curious to kind of like excavate and see if there's more there. Surely there has to be. Because like I'm also thinking about like stuff like She Wants Revenge is also sort of like a spoken word kind of thing. You know, I'm thinking about like, what was the band that you had just said?
Hold Steady.
Yeah, Hold Steady. You know, I feel like Idols does that a lot too.
It's actually
so
around a lot. I feel like it's actually around a lot. Like once you kind of see what it is, and if you can distill it down to like a very basic form, it's surprising how much it kind of pops up. Sorry, I mean.
No, that's okay. You can keep on going, even if you want. If you have
No. I think you got it. I mean, I think you and I are on the same page. I can't speak of see if Taylor was there, but everything that you're saying, I completely agree with. Where I was just like listening to it, and I thought, it's going to be hard to find an example of this that I actually like. But then once I was listening to older stuff, it got the gears turning about stuff I had heard in the past from bands that I actually know and like. That isn't the classical beat poetry, as I think I wanted to find something that, going into my picks, maybe like jumping ahead a little bit here, something that was relevant to me, that was relevant to genres that I listened to, that had a beat poetry aspect to them, and not necessarily something that was from the beat poetry era of like jazz and pianos and social criticism and things like that, which is kind of the classic stuff of beat poetry that I was listening to, and that's fine. Like that's as a foundation for what I was able to find in a more contemporary time, that worked out really well. But initially for that, I wasn't too enthusiastic. I wasn't like, man, something's really sticking out for me. I don't know if we can talk about it. I do kind of have a B-side, but I remember the first beat poetry song that I ever heard after listening to it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead. What is it?
So it was actually, this is my B-side too, so just to get it out of the way. Everybody's Free by Baz Luhrmann.
Interesting.
Which also might be kind of known as the Sunscreen song. It's basically like you've definitely heard it. If you look it up, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I think it's a commencement speech that was given at some point in time, and it kind of is like, it's like life advice. It came out in the 90s, and I feel like occasionally something will happen to me and this song will just roll into my head. But it's very like beat poetry-esque. They did another song right after 9/11 that it didn't fall to as much fanfare as this one, but it was in the similar veins of like a grieving song. I'm not sure if it's Baz Luhrmann the director or Baz Luhrmann is a group or what.
It is Baz Luhrmann the director.
Okay, all right, which is interesting, but like I don't know, it's like really, it's kind of interesting. There's just like some lines in here that I think, hold on, there was one that seems like, yeah, here's like a little stanza. Don't waste your time on jealousy. Sometimes you're ahead, sometimes you're behind. The race is long, and in the end, you're only with yourself. Remember, compliments you receive, forget the insults. If you succeed in doing this, tell me how. Keep your old love letters, throw away your bank statements, stretch. Like, it just kind of goes on like that to a background that's really interesting and kind of like soothing in a way to me to listen to. And I think some of this advice is really interesting. And then, like, because it just goes into some strange times. Like, it starts with, wear sunscreen. And you're just quickly diverting away from that to, like, almost what seems to be random lines. Understand that friends come and go, but a precious few who you should hold on to. Like that kind of stuff. It sounds like corny and tacky, but I feel like it's really beautiful.
And that's a great example of like you said, taking a simple concept and kind of pushing its limits, which is very much in the free verse beat poetry tradition, right? Like that's the kind of thing that like Allen Ginsberg would love, of like advice in big quotes that just gets like ever more obscure and ridiculous. I think probably I kind of like came at this in a weird direction because the first like spoken word or beat poetry adjacent thing that I remember is Fitter Happier by Radiohead, which uses the Mac text to speech to read a bunch of similar things, fitter, happier, more productive, at ease, a safer car. It's these like trappings of modern life, and it just escalates until it like has this cacophony of distortion behind it and says like a pig in a cage on antibiotics, and that's how it ends. And that just like scared the crap out of me as a kid. I was like, what is this? But I couldn't stop listening to it. I was like, this is so fascinating and weird, and like it's on this rock album, like why is this here? And as you get older and you learn more about this tradition and why this is, so close to rock music as a movement, like it makes sense what they're doing here, where they're like taking this form and subverting it by having the computer do the speaking and like chopping up that sample and like creating rhythm out of this rhythmless computer, which is really interesting. Like it's doing some really cool subversive things with a form that by this point was 45, almost 50 years old. And I think that's just really cool, and it made me want to like go back and look at this stuff, which I then did.
So I think you probably already described this sort of like in your preamble, but primarily what separates like poetry, I don't know what to call just a poem, versus the beat aspect of it, is mostly in subject matter, and then like some of it's sort of like phrasing, or like you said, I think I had said that it's not as like focused on like a rhyme scheme specifically, right?
Bingo. That's a big part of it. So I'm looking at the American Writers Museum crash course on beat poetry. I'll put this in the show notes. Quick facts about beat poetry. Number one, beat poetry started out in the 1940s in New York City, though the heart of the movement was in San Francisco in the 1950s. Number two, the beat poets were interested in challenging mainstream culture and conventional writing styles and techniques. Three, free verse was the preferred form of the beat poets, so that is, like you said, verse without a rhyme scheme. Four, favorite topics of the beats: transgression, obscenity, and alienation. Five, jazz was a major influence on the beat poets. Its improvisation and rhythmic qualities match up well with their own musical use of free verse. Six, the beats were often inspired by Buddhism, hallucinogenic drugs, and higher consciousness. And it goes on, but I think perhaps one of the crucial things here is Jack Kerouac is said to have coined the term beat generation when describing the down-and-out status of himself and his peers during the post-war years. So it is this kind of like malaise within a society that feels as though it is prospering. It's this kind of like anti-consumerist, downtrodden, like alternative thinking, higher consciousness, like
Yeah.
the very beginnings of what becomes the counterculture, basically.
It certainly does lead itself to having a certain type of person kind of certain type of person to write these poems, and also it would attract certain folks kind of like that. It does feel sort of like, it's funny to say, like, I feel like Jack Kerouac and I feel like Radiohead are both like things that a dude definitely, like a certain kind of guy definitely likes.
Oh yes, yes.
Like I feel like there's a real person you can sort of form almost instantly from this.
It's interesting you say that because I switched my pick at the last minute for that very reason.
Yeah.
So it might make sense if I just go ahead and go first.
Yeah, I think so too. That sounds like a good idea.
All right. This week I chose Losing My Edge by LCD Sound System.
I'm losing my edge. I'm losing my edge to the kids from France and from London. But I was there. I was there in 1968. I was there at the first can show in Cologne.
Losing My Edge is the shot heard round Brooklyn in terms of LCD Sound System. It was James Murphy's first single under this name after years of being a DJ and playing in various bands. It's 2002. Hipsters are just starting to become a thing, and James Murphy is already over it. This song is, I think, one of the best pieces of musical art of the decade, the 2000s, because it just so encapsulates these two dueling energies that were at war culturally at that time. You have these young people who are so against this pretension of a certain kind of baby boomer, the kind of baby boomer who brags about, I was there at the first can show. I was there when Captain Beefheart started up his first band. I told him, don't do it that way, you'll never make a dime. I was there at CBGB's. It's like this rock snob person who we all knew and we all were to a certain extent at the time. And he is simultaneously railing against them while also feeling the horror of becoming that person. Where in the second half of the song, he talks about, let me see if I can find it. I'm losing my edge to the internet seekers who can tell me every member of every good group from 1962 to 1978. I hear that you and your friends have sold your guitars and bought turntables. I hear that you and your friends have sold your turntables and bought guitars. I hear that everybody you know is more relevant than anybody that I know. You can feel the Jack Kerouac rhythm in it, just reading it off the page, and then James Murphy is kind of sing-talking it. And the anxiety in the build of the music is just so palpable. It's the whole youth culture industry that rock and roll has become by this point. And he's talking about the avant-garde, and it's still that way, where he's as out of it as he is in it. He's hating on these boomer elitists while also feeling like an elitist because he, was there in the 70s and 80s, and he has Eric B. and Rakim on vinyl. And I think that is such a cool subversion of beat poetry to make fun of the beat poets while also becoming one yourself. And to do that as your debut single, to immediately walk onto the scene and say, I'm losing my edge. What a brilliant, funny beat move. And I feel the song just gets better with age, because now that his generation is truly the gatekeepers of the music industry, it's almost doubly funny. It's you could see a version of this that was about the TikTok generation very easily. It would not be hard to update. And yet, it's a cool sound, and it, was very influential and did a lot of things for dance music. I don't know, every couple of years I have a moment where I just, spend an afternoon with this song. Because I feel it wants to, it has so many layers, and it wants to drag you in. I recently read the Genius article for it, and I love what they say at the end, where James is repeating, you don't know what you really want, and whoever annotated this said, this is the retort of any DJ exploring the outer fringes of musical esoterica. Given some of the obscurities listed in this song, the people on the dance floor might question the DJ's taste. James Murphy, himself a DJ, famous for spinning eclectic sets, is simultaneously saying, I don't care what you want, you have bad taste, and just relax and keep dancing, you're gonna love this. And I feel that is such a beat thing to do, to just be pretentious but also welcoming at the same time. It's a fun, quirky energy, and I kind of love it. That said, Sean can totally roast me because this song's very long.
No, actually, I think it's right. I think it's about the right length. I think it's very good. I like that it's basically exactly what you said, attacking people, and the fact that he just doesn't want to hear it anymore. I think it's a it's a very artfully way of saying it that he doesn't want to hear it anymore. I like that it's just a voice juxtaposed to like the worst, most tinny sounding drum machine at first, and then, but it kind of like speaks to that too, that there is this nostalgia of people that want to tell you when it was better back in the day. Like, where was I at? I was at a meeting this week and somebody was talking about how they loved the Pixies. And it deviated quickly to this conversation where it was like, well, the Pixies were doing everything before grunge was a thing. Like, if it wasn't for the Pixies, grunge wouldn't even exist. And I think, I swear I heard the line that Nirvana wouldn't have been anything if it wasn't for the Pixies. I cannot evaluate that statement, but it felt like a pretty heavy-handed pretty go there. I don't really hold the Pixies or Nirvana in particularly high esteem as like.
But that is the kind of thing that like some rock nerd somewhere will die on a hill for.
Oh yeah, this person was like, they had clearly had a conversation with other people about this, that they were ready to die on it. I was like, oh my god, here we go. Like, it's almost to the point where I like this.
I mean, if the primordial oozes didn't dance in rhythmic patterns at the beginning of time, you know, we never would have ended up with hyperpop. So I mean, like,
right. I don't know. It's just I feel like this sometimes where when people ask me, like, what's your podcast about, right? And then I tell them, it's like expected a little bit that I'm gonna like nerd out on them immediately about music, and I just like let it go. Like, I'm just like I'm not interested in talking with music with nostalgic music nerds.
Right, you're not interested in having a conversation of like correct musical opinions.
Yeah,
you know, you're not really interested in like, this is better than this. This show has, maybe at one point our show was supposed to be about like some sort of like objective like arbitration of like, this is the rule of law and we are choosing the definite answers, but it's more like over time it's realizing that every song and every genre has a time and a place, and most songs have merit given the correct context. And we're excavating that. We're trying to find those niche instances of where a song is perfect. We're not like arguing whether AC/DC or Led Zeppelin are better. Like nobody needs that.
Right.
And yet that's how we've talked about music for so long.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. We were those assholes.
And not just not just us, like the three of us.
Yeah.
I mean, like the royal we, like, discourse about music has been that way and is still that way. Like, we still see people that are like Megan Thee Stallion or Cardi B, and it's like, y'all, there's room for more than one female rapper.
Right.
This
is a conversation, not a podium.
I mean, sometimes it's a podium.
Listen, Du Hast is the greatest rock song of all times.
Tyler, have I fully won you over to the LCD Sound System fan club?
I mean, I've always kind of been a believer, right? I feel like this song is great as like an art piece. I think this is best used as an art piece. I think it's cool. I really like it. I'm like trying to like listen to like a little bit of it, but it's like, it really is sort of like one of those things where it's like, you probably, for the most part, aren't going to put it on a playlist. You could probably like DJ it, or there's probably like maybe like a remix to it. I feel like it would be like great, like consumed live. You know, I feel like that could be like really fun, but I feel like I'm going to say that about everything LCD Sound System does, right? I
mean, there is a really great 8.5 minute live recording of it from Madison Square Garden that I will put in the show notes.
But I feel like, that being said, I feel like a live performance is different from like a headphones, work on a paper experience. But that's not what we're trying to figure out here, right? We're trying to figure out if this is a good song as an example of beat poetry, in which it is. It's great. And like we had kind of already discussed, that I do really feel like a past self is called out in it. and try to be like, yeah, I really did feel all these things, didn't I? I'm trying to think if there's anything in particular that really like stuck out as like, like specifically poignant. I do feel like sort of like just listing off literally a bunch of like obscure isn't correct, but basically a bunch of artists as like lyrical content as like something that I distinctly remember being like a badge of privilege or like a badge of like honor. Like, how many indie bands can you list off? You know, like that means I'm better than you. You know, but that being said, I do love Sun Ra and I do love and Pharaoh Sanders. You know, like, you know, I feel like he knows what he's doing. He's got some fun taste in there. And I feel like, that being said, I do feel like there are some people that are trying to like consume things as like a way of like being like objective and like proving that you have taste versus like trying to just naturally find the taste yourself. Like, I feel like because of this podcast, I have just sort of been like, I'm going to try to explore as many sounds and genres and things as possible. And so like I do get put on blast for my appreciation of jazz. But, you know,
it's all in jest though. We don't mean it.
But, you know, like, I get it. I know how it is. I know how I be when sometimes I pick jazz songs for this, you know, but you know, that's just part of like my personal journey. And I feel like we've probably all collectively gotten better at just sort of being true to ourselves and the things that we actually are into and really defining our taste. And I feel like that's all he really wants to do in this song is like, just listen to whatever kind of weird stuff I'm spinning for you. You'll probably like it, you know, as long as you're not doing it based on like what's popular. And I think that's a good sentiment.
Well, Tyler, I think it probably makes the most sense to go to your song next.
Okay.
What do you have for us?
This week I chose Only My Honesty Matters by Bed.
We're just obvious. Hippie private schools fighting amongst themselves and beard trimmers and sloppy eyes with sloppy tears that splash upon the things that you left. We're just obvious. Alternative thoughts, alternative clothes, or leisurely dressed boss and Caudry all in one time team. We're just obvious, like David Cameron, bow tie at breakfast, rotund facial cheekiness.
So I had found this song on a Spotify Discovery. I think a few like Christmases ago. I was taking a walk with the good girl Rosie. She's a nice little pitty. We took a walk around the block, and this song kind of came up, and there was something about it that just like really struck me. There's so much about the sort of very straightforward like lyrical delivery of it. Little did I know, it sort of is more intended to be poetry rather than a song. But I really found like sort of like this very straightforward delivery with this sort of like almost like melancholy Sega Genesis like synthesizer sound, and like that combination of things really just sort of really like sparked, you know, like a bunch of different sensory things. It really kind of got me interested in this. And so I feel like the song is really is best kind of like described by one of the lyrics kind of towards the end. We're tiny little porcelain ants running around in a large fishbowl full of aggressive men with beard trimmers. I feel like the whole song is just sort of like about kind of like really sort of like when you step back from yourself and you kind of examine like how weird we are. Like just we're just kind of like people are just gonna do what they're gonna do. And there's all these eccentricities and ways we're trying to like fluff each other up or trying to like peacock in a way or trying to be too cool. And I feel like it's just sort of like, it's like, doesn't really super matter. It's like, I don't know. I feel like I definitely picked this song first because I like the song and less so as like the fact that it was specifically was like about beat poetry. I thought I obviously it fits the challenge, but I just was like, I gotta have this song on this playlist because it's just so interesting. and I feel like really just sort of like the listing off of just different sort of like adjectives and sort of like creating these little scenes, like, I don't understand what most of these things he's referencing are, but I'm like, I like, if I'm ever like interested in it, I feel like I could really sort of like dig into it and really find a lot of sort of like, I mean, he sounds English, so I assume this is probably, English problems. So, I just think it's just an interesting little song, and I feel like it fit the challenge.
Yeah, I think this is like, both of our songs are personal in that they're about personal, like, struggles. But this one feels simultaneously more personal and universal. Like, it's not about being a musician or being a music fan. It's about, like, a kind of class experience. And, it's a real, like, British melancholy, like you said, which is really interesting. I love the line, flirty cockney croissant crumbs in the morning, going to war with your best pals. Like,
yeah.
Woof. Your leisurely dressed boss and corporate all in one tiny team. Like, it's really digging into some things there. And the delivery, like you said, is so almost monotone, but not quite, that it really, like, drags you into the malaise of it. I like it a lot. And it's funny too. Like, it's got a wry sense of humor to it. David Cameron, bow tie at breakfast,
I don't like anyone's music, not mine. New World Order.
Yeah, exactly. This is really cool. I'm gonna have to check this album out. I feel like I recognize a couple of the names of the collaborators on this, but I don't know where from. So I definitely want to look at this more.
I think this is just an objectively amazing song.
There you go.
Like, immediately upon hearing it, I was in love. It's just everything was right about it. Everything is right. I cannot think of like one thing I would possibly change about this song or anything that is bad. I think it all works. I love the synth. I love the timbre of his voice. I love the beat poetry aspect. I just am gushing a little bit about this song because it's just that good. Like, it's inspiringly good because it's approachable. I think in listening to this song, I am realizing again that, like, you don't have to... I put myself and my creativity on this pedestal that it has to be, like, as good as the artists that I admire. And that's... I have this, like, goal, and when it doesn't reach it, I'm just to feel inferior. And when I listen to this, it reminds me that you can make beautiful things and be creative because you are.
Yeah.
And that's, like, amazingly inspiring to me to listen to this because I was like, oh, this is so great, but it's not like anything else that I listened to. But it's amazing. Like, it clicked for me the first time that I heard it. Like, 5 beats into it, I was in love with it. And so, yeah, that's why I don't really have much to talk about here, except I just think it's so wonderful. I feel so inspired now. Like, I want to go buy a synthesizer.
I mean, yeah, it's fine.
Like, it's like the essence of marketing. It feels that you're filling the need that the product has for your customer, and basically, like, it did it right off the bat for me. And listening to this, I was just like, oh yeah, no, this is it. I just want to walk around all day and take photographs to this.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, I feel like it does so little. And it's like, this isn't like an insane, like synth beat, like there's not like a synth rhythm that's like really intense, but it's like almost like kind of like we were saying, the malaise, like sort of like the slow pace of it is like, it feels almost glacial, but it's like, it's that sort of restraint. And then it's like, we're not going to really change it up. It's going to be this the whole time.
Right.
And because it's so like elongated, it kind of like keeps being fresh because it feels like it gets back to the beginning of like the rhythm, and you're like, oh, I was waiting for this. I was, there's a niceness to like to hear the repetition of it, which is then put on like no like real lyrical consistency, right? It's just free form. It's just like there's free. So I feel like it gives you a good foundation to then sort of talk about whatever on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is awesome. Well done. All right, Sean, what you got?
Cool. Well, this week I chose, I'm really going to mispronounce this, Salmonir by Under Oath. So I probably bought this album back in 2006, and I wanted to, when I was listening to beat poetry and trying to find a song for this one, this song came to mind because I feel like I listened to this album so much in my CD player in my car for such a long time, and I always thought that this interlude was really interesting on this like math metal post-hardcore album, because if you know anything about Under Oath, this was really when they were deep into their like Christian-y band. We're from Florida and We Love God and Phase, and when I heard this, it was kind of a deviation from that a little bit because I think it's like Psalm 50 out of the Bible, but like spoken in Russian. And it's like overdubbed at the end with a crowd and somebody like preaching, and it leads in with some oscillations and some synth drums, I think. And I just thought it, like, as a soundscape, it was really interesting. Like, I hadn't really heard much like that in rock music up until that time, and I thought it was kind of beautiful as a break, because it kind of falls in that classic hair metal like fifth or sixth track of an album, and then it leads out of a heavy song into a heavy song with like a click drum roll. So I thought it was really nice, right? And there's a lot of mystery with it in Russian because I feel like at the time it came out, I think the lyrics in the album were just in Russian. Like, it wasn't clear what it was. You had to go look it up or find somebody that might know. But yeah, it was just like the first thing that came to my mind, and I thought this would be a cool sort of beat poetry-esque reimagination, circa emo.
Ooh, boy, you're really playing into my nerdiness now, Sean. This is super cool. I think, once again, all of our songs have lots of layers. This one, literal layers. Lots of sonic layers. Like you said, there's this Russian, and then there's this English that's kind of lower in the mix. And it, doing a little bit of digging, the Russian and the English are actually the same thing. They're both recitations of Psalm 50, which is kind of an interesting scriptural passage. So it's a psalm that it has an introduction and a conclusion, but then it really has like two meaty sections in which God is testifying against the Jewish people. In the first, he tells the people that he's not satisfied with material sacrifices of animals and meat and things, that he wants worship and sincere prayer. And then in the second, he is warning them against hypocrisy and testifying against the hypocrites among them. And so it's really interesting to see Under Oath, this band with kind of this like interesting relationship to their own faith and their like legacy as a quote unquote Christian band, taking a scriptural passage and doing this very kind of beat-esque like recitation within a different context, right? Like playing the Russian as this very like solemn, stoic reading, and then underneath it having this very fiery televangelist-y reading of the English translation with a crowd behind it. It seems to be pushing you, or it seems to be pointing towards like a more restrained expression of faith that is honest, as opposed to the sensationalist Western evangelist tradition, which, is up my alley as a religious person and person with evangelical trauma, right? But also, it's just a really cool way of making that point. Like, rather than singing about like charlatan stage preachers or whatever, you just create it as a soundscape, as an object to be ridiculed. And I think that's really cool. And the use of the distortion and the guitars as it kind of builds and covers up that like Western preacher voice is really interesting. Like, yeah, there's a lot of thought that went into these 3-ish minutes, and I think it's a really cool example of how like you can make a cool piece of spoken word poetry out of any existing text if you recontextualize it in the right way.
Yeah, well, Taylor obviously had more context for this than I did. Because I think when I was listening to this and trying to think about what I was going to say about it, I feel like I had just more questions than I had answers, because I feel like, can religious like text be, I guess in some context could be like a counterculture, or like be about like counterculture, free thought, freedom of expression and stuff like that. I feel like it definitely has a place there. Yeah. And so like I was like, well, I'm not gonna like count this out as like, you know, like not, doesn't like apply as like the challenge, but I guess I was just more interested in like, why is this what Sean chose? Like, what's like sort of like the angle shoot here? And it seems like, as Sean kind of said, he says like, well, I want to see what an artist that I already like kind of does with the idea of more of a formal like poetic format for a band that normally would never even touch this sort of like style formula in any capacity. But so I think that's cool. I think that's interesting. But what I do think is interesting, I guess, in addition, I would say kind of like when I'm thinking also about like sort of like this genre and generally like like dirty vocals in general, I do feel like they end up being much more poetic and much more sort of like not necessarily like more narrative, but I feel like they just have a different like sort of like substance to them because so many things are like screamed and vocalized in such a way that is painful, you know, if not done correctly. But a lot of these people ended up having severe problems with their voices because they didn't do things correctly, but like having to like really like choose your words carefully because each word has like this power and this like emphasis. I feel like it really lends itself to a very poetic style. You have to really like make like the metaphor, right? Like I feel like, you know, like a Taylor Swift song would not translate very well into like a metal song because she is very conversational almost. It's very like very wordy. The wordiness is almost the point. And so I like this sort of like this specific area of thinking and thinking about like metal or just hardcore lyrics in a more poetic sense, because I feel like that really digs into like what they're actually like trying to do. Like sure, like some people probably were like, you know, like Attack was or whatever was just like, we're just saying shit because it's funny, or like whatever, you know, like whatever, you know, like some people were trying to make like a funny thing about it. But I feel like I feel like Under Oath is a great example of a band that really tries to say something and try to really try to be careful with their words. And so yeah, so I feel like as a band that's doing sort of like religious, almost like heresy by making like metal music in some ways, to then also actively be trying to like glorify God, I think is, I suppose in a way, a counterculture of a counterculture. So I'm saying is good job, Sean.
You did it.
Yeah.
See, the funny thing is, I felt like mine was the worst. I felt like you guys actually really did a very, very good job, and mine underperformed.
I mean, you thought about it. I mean, you had an idea. You definitely were like chasing a thought. And I feel like me thinking through this as like I'm like listening to it, I feel like has value. I think it's cool. it is an interlude, as you said, so it's like, it's definitely not going to be like the most like enthralling like song that's going to come up on the playlist, but I mean, like, it meets the challenge, and it's an interesting thing to sort of really sort of dig into, consume.
Well, with that, it's time for our listener B-sides, and like most of the songs that we had tonight, if you find yourself coming around to a time, baby right round, and maybe that might involve 8 wheels under your feet, Beachmont Roll Arena is the place to come on down and play for Beat Poetry Night. It's going to be December 25th, Beachmont Roll Arena. We'll be there.
In spirit.
In spirit. And you can also be there in spirit. Break out your skates, go to your kitchen, spin around, put on some sweet beat poetry songs, and have yourself a merry old Christmas time. But with that, B-sides, you got them. People want to hear them. Fill out the rest of this skate playlist. We have never done a roller skating challenge, have we? It just hit me. We'll talk about this more at Billy Joe Armstrong, but
I'm pretty sure
we not.
I'm pretty
have
sure.
we?
I think we've done one.
We'll
we
figure
We
that
need
out
to
later.
do more than one.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I had a lot. I'm just going to give a few. Voiceover by Fred Thomas was my initial pick. It's kind of a punkier version of the thing that I did pick. American Garbage by AJJ. Just about anything by The Hold Steady, to be honest. And then Sean at the top of the show reminded me of a weird thing that exists. Ben Folds made an album in 1997 called Fear of Pop, where he does the music and William Shatner reads poetry over it. So if that's a thing you want, you could go find that.
Pretty much shot from the hip, but How Do You Make Me Feel off that same album is also very good. Good in the same way.
And then Baz Luhrmann was my other pick. We already talked about it, but that was what I wanted to go for. But then I thought there's got to be something more new and creative and fun out there.
Well, Tyler, if people want to share their verse with you, where can they do that?
Hey everybody, you can find my design illustration work at rudepets.club, and as always, you can find me on socials as Rude Pets Club on Instagram and Twitter.
Sean, if people want to be in your backing band, where can they find you?
Ooh, you can find me on Instagram at TellySean.
Yeah, and if you want to snap along the audience with me, you can find me on the socials at TC Olmstead. All of these songs will be on the official No Repeat Podcast playlist. We are off to record our monthly bonus show, Billy Joe Armstrong's Middle School Notebook. You can get it for $1 a month on Patreon, patreon.com/No Repeat. And we'll be back next week with another free episode of No Repeat.